Hello there, and a very warm welcome to Past Treasures. Wherever you happen to be in the world right now, whatever the hour on your clock, I invite you to pause for a moment. Have you ever felt that quiet, unsettling sense that the story we tell ourselves about our own past might be incomplete? What if the echoes we hear from the deepest corridors of history are not just the whispers of myth, but the fading voices of a forgotten reality? Tonight, we journey back to the very dawn of civilization, to a place of sun-baked earth and winding rivers where the first lines of human history were etched not on paper, but into clay. We are going to Sumer to listen to the stories they told about themselves and about the beings they said came down from the heavens. These are tales that have puzzled scholars for generations, stories of the Anunnaki. Were they simply the gods of a nascent religion? Metaphors for the terrifying and wondrous forces of nature? Or were they something else? Something more tangible, whose presence sparked a revolution in human consciousness? The truth, as is so often the case, remains shrouded in the dust of millennia. But the questions persist, waiting patiently for those with the curiosity to ask them. As we begin to sift through these ancient secrets together, let us do so with an open mind, ready to embrace the mystery. And before we settle in, if this kind of deep exploration into our shared past sparks something in you, I would be so grateful if you took a moment to tap the like button or consider subscribing. It's a quiet, simple gesture of support that allows these stories to find others who might be searching for them. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. It's always a wonder to see how far these tales can travel. So, find a comfortable place, perhaps dim the lights, and allow the noise of the modern world to fade away. Our journey is about to begin. Let us begin by silencing the world around us. In your mind, subtract the endless hum of electricity, the distant roar of a jet engine, the electronic chime of a notification. What you are left with is a profound, organic quietness that our modern ears are no longer trained to hear. It is in this deep silence that we can begin our journey. You can hear the gentle sigh of water against a muddy bank, the great Euphrates River, the lifeblood of this land, breathing in the cool night air. You can hear the soft bleating of a goat somewhere in the darkness, and from the heart of the settlement, ahead, the faint rhythmic scraping of a potter's wheel, a sound that has not yet ceased its turning for the night. We part a curtain of tall, whispering reeds, and there, bathed in the silver glow of the moon and a breathtaking canopy of stars, is a city. It is not a city of glittering steel or illuminated glass, but one of earth and clay, seemingly grown from the very soil upon which it rests. Its walls are formidable, constructed from innumerable mud bricks, each one patiently formed by human hands and baked hard by the same relentless sun that now scorches the land of modern-day Iraq. This is the ancient land of Sumer, a civilization that flourished more than 2 millennia before the Roman Empire was even a whispered legend. In so many ways, this is where our story, the story of cities, of laws, of writing, truly began. As we move toward the open city gates, our footsteps make no sound on the dusty path. The very air seems to shift as we pass within the walls. The clean, earthy scent of the river is replaced by a complex tapestry of smells, the aroma of a life lived in close quarters. There is the warm, comforting scent of bread baking in a communal oven, its fragrance a promise of sustenance. There is the sharp, agricultural tang of livestock settled in their pens for the night. And drifting down from a high place we cannot yet see, the sweet, heavy perfume of incense, a scent intended for beings other than mortals. The streets are a bewildering yet logical maze, narrow and winding, designed for the passage of people and the occasional creaking cart, not for the machines that would one day conquer the world. Houses of clay are packed closely together, their flat roofs forming a second city above the first, an elevated world of cool breezes where families would sleep on suffocatingly hot nights. There is a strangeness to it all, a sense of profound antiquity, yet it is also deeply, almost uncannily, familiar. This is the template, the original blueprint from which every city, town, and metropolis would eventually descend. It is a well-established historical fact that southern Mesopotamia, and Sumer in particular, was the cradle of the world's first complex urban societies. It was a revolutionary leap forward for humankind. But to stand here, in the imagined quiet of this ancient night, it does not feel like a fact from a textbook. It feels like a profound secret we have just been allowed to witness. Our eyes are drawn to the dark, sticky lines of mortar binding the pale bricks of a large structure. It is bitumen, a naturally occurring asphalt that seeps from the ground in this region. This black, viscous substance was the Sumerians' miracle material, their superglue, their waterproof sealant, their all-purpose construction adhesive. They used it with incredible ingenuity, caulking their reed boats to make them watertight, and using it as a binding agent for the bricks of their city walls and temples. It was a simple but remarkably effective piece of ancient technology that permitted them to build on a scale never before imagined, to create structures that were bigger, stronger, and more enduring. It is a small, easily overlooked detail, but it speaks volumes about the people who lived here. They were not merely surviving in a harsh landscape. They were actively innovating, mastering their environment, and thriving. And then, as we round a corner, we finally see it. Dominating the entire city, a colossal dark shape silhouetted against a brilliant sea of stars, is the ziggurat. It is an immense, stepped pyramid, a man-made mountain meticulously crafted from millions of clay bricks, rising in a series of terraces towards the heavens. The structure seems to possess its own gravitational pull, drawing the entire city into its orbit, serving as the undisputed center of gravity for both the physical and the spiritual lives of its inhabitants. An instinctual feeling, a primal sense of awe, urges us to walk towards it, a pull that must have been felt daily by the thousands of souls sleeping in the homes clustered around its base. Drawing closer, we can make out the immense stairways that climb its sheer faces. Each step has been worn smooth by the passage of countless forgotten footsteps. Priests, scribes, and perhaps even the city's kings would have ascended these very stairs, their eyes and hearts fixed on the sacred shrine that would have once crowned the summit. It is here, in the immense shadow cast by this structure, that the mystery of the Anunnaki feels most present. For the ancient Sumerians, this ziggurat was not merely an impressive feat of architecture, something to be admired for its scale. It was a conduit, a tangible connection point, a ladder reaching from their world, the fragile world of mortals, to the realm of the gods above. Archaeologists and historians continue to debate the precise and multifaceted functions of these monumental structures. Were they purely temples, symbolic mountains constructed to elevate the priests closer to the divine realm? Or were they also the administrative hearts of the city-states, containing granaries, record offices, and sophisticated astronomical observatories? The shrine that stood at the very top was considered the literal, earthly dwelling place of the city's patron deity, a sacred space where the divine could physically descend from the heavens and reside among them. And in the land of Sumer, the divine had a collective name, the Anunnaki. We stand at its base, our heads tilted back, trying to see the highest terrace against the star-dusted sky. One can almost imagine the scene from millennia ago. Priests robed in white linen, performing their ancient rituals in the pale moonlight, their chanted prayers echoing down into the sleeping streets below. They were not just praying to abstract concepts. They were tending to the needs of gods who were believed to be intensely real, profoundly powerful, and often demanding. The Anunnaki of the Sumerian texts were not ethereal, formless spirits. They were described as beings with distinct personalities, with complex family dynamics, with fierce rivalries, and with tangible needs. And according to the records, it was they who commanded that these towering structures be built. Consider for a moment the sheer scale of the effort, the decades upon decades of coordinated human labor. Imagine thousands of people toiling under the brutal Mesopotamian sun, hauling, lifting, and placing millions of bricks to erect this grand staircase for a god who may or may not choose to descend it. It represents a level of collective devotion that is difficult for the modern mind to fully grasp. It is almost as if they were driven by more than just faith, as if they were repaying a cosmic debt or fulfilling a contract they could not dare to break. The shadow of the Anunnaki is not a literal one cast by the ziggurat's immense mass. It is a conceptual weight on the soul of the city, a constant, pervasive awareness that a higher, inscrutable power was watching from above from that starlit penthouse at the very top of their world. We are still standing at the foot of that colossal structure, lost in the immensity of it all. The cool night air wraps around us like a shroud as we contemplate the staggering faith, or perhaps the staggering obligation required to build such a monument. But as we stare up at the darkened steps, a new question begins to surface in our minds, a question that shifts our focus from the what to the who. Who, precisely, were they building this for? Turning away from the ziggurat, we drift through the silent labyrinth of streets, allowing our curiosity to be our guide. We soon find ourselves drawn toward a large, unassuming building, its doorway left open to the night. Stepping inside, the air changes. It smells of dry clay, of dust, and of something else, the scent of accumulated knowledge. This is a house of tablets, what we might call a library or a scribal school, the place where the city's memories, its records, and its sacred stories were preserved for eternity. Lining the walls are shelves laden with baked clay tablets. There are thousands of them, each one covered in the tiny, elegant wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, the world's first known system of writing. We reach out and pick one up. It is surprisingly heavy, cool, and solid in our hands. Embedded in its surface is not just writing, but a story. As we trace the intricate symbols, a narrative that has been silent for millennia begins to stir in our imagination. We witness an arrival. The texts, when you read them, do not speak of a gentle, ethereal materialization of gods from thin air. They speak of a descent. The Anunnaki, the stories say, came from the heavens. Let your mind paint the scene the Sumerians described. Not a single being, but a group, arriving on Earth after what is described as a long journey through a celestial ocean. The language is, of course, poetic and filled with metaphor. The texts speak of a terrifying brilliance, of an overwhelming power, of a presence that must have been both awe-inspiring and deeply frightening to the early humans who witnessed it. But as we stand here in this silent library, the modern part of our brain cannot help but superimpose new images over these ancient words. When the scribes wrote from the heavens, did they simply mean the conceptual, non-physical realm of the gods? Or were they pointing to the literal physical sky above their heads? This is the fundamental question that hums with a quiet energy beneath the surface of all these ancient stories. Were these beings gods in the way we might think of Zeus or Odin powerful, metaphysical entities born from human belief, personifications of the forces of nature? Or were they something else entirely? Were they visitors? Physical beings stepping out of something. The Sumerians, after all, did not possess a vocabulary that included words like extraterrestrial or spacecraft. So if they saw such things, what words would they have been forced to use? They might have described a craft as a shining chariot or a celestial boat. They called the beings themselves Dinger, a word whose pictographic symbol is a star. It is typically translated as gods, but a more literal interpretation is simply the shining ones. It is a beautiful, poetic term that, perhaps intentionally, leaves the door to interpretation wide open. Mainstream scholars and historians continue to argue quite reasonably that the phrase, "from the heavens," was meant as a metaphor for their supreme and untouchable status, in the same way a medieval text might describe a king as having a heavenly right to rule. The established historical view is clear and concise. The Anunnaki were the principal deities of the vast and complex Sumerian pantheon. Their name itself is generally translated to mean something akin to princely offspring or those of royal blood, signifying their divine lineage as the children of the chief sky god, Anu. They were, in this view, simply the highest tier of divinity in a sophisticated religious system designed to make sense of a chaotic world. But as we run a thumb over the hard, dry clay of the tablet, that explanation, as neat as it is, feels perhaps a little too simple. It doesn't quite capture the strangely specific, almost technical tone that permeates some of these texts. They describe beings who came here, who did things, who had a mission. Our eyes wander to another set of artifacts on a nearby shelf. These are not flat tablets, but small, cylindrical stones, each one intricately carved with miniature scenes. These are cylinder seals. When rolled across a piece of wet clay, they would leave a raised impression, serving as an official signature, a mark of ownership, or a way to seal a container. Most of them depict familiar scenes from Sumerian life. A king making an offering to a god, arrangements of animals, or various religious symbols. But then our gaze falls upon a replica of a particularly famous and controversial seal, one that has ignited endless debate. It is known to modern scholarship as VA 243. The seal depicts several seated figures, as many do. But it is what is depicted in the sky above them that arrests our attention. It is a clear image of a star, surrounded by several orbiting spheres or orbs. To a mainstream archaeologist, the interpretation is straightforward. It is the sun, surrounded by other stars, or perhaps religious symbols whose specific meaning is now lost to us. But to someone looking for a different answer, someone willing to entertain a more radical possibility, it looks uncannily like a map of a solar system. And when they count the orbs, including the central star, they find a configuration that is strikingly similar to our own solar system, complete with planets that were not officially discovered by modern science until the age of the telescope. What if this wasn't just a decorative pattern? What if it was a diagram? It is a tantalizing, almost irresistible thought, though it must be said that attempting to navigate interstellar space using this as a map would likely lead to profound disappointment. The myths themselves seem to bolster this idea of a physical journey. They speak of a great Anunnaki council convened in their distant celestial home, where the decision was made to undertake a journey to a new world Earth. They did not simply pop into existence on a mountaintop. They arrived. And when they arrived, they got to work. Let's be honest with ourselves. If a group of shining, technologically advanced beings descended from the sky today, we would not be calling them gods. We would have 4K drone footage from 1,000 different angles flooding social media, and a dedicated 24-hour news panel arguing about their intentions before they even had a chance to remove their helmets. The Sumerians had only soft clay and sharpened reeds. They described what they saw in the only language available to them, the language of the divine, the majestic, and the sacred. So we are left here in this quiet, dusty room, holding the physical evidence of their beliefs in our hands. The academic world tells us, with sound reasoning, that it is mythology, a rich and complex tapestry of stories created to explain their world. Why do the rivers flood? Why do the crops grow? Why is society structured in this particular way? It is the epic story of humanity's relationship with the awesome, unpredictable, and often terrifying forces of nature, which they personified as powerful gods. And yet, the stories feel so strangely specific. They speak of long orbital periods, of planetary alignments, of specific numbers of travelers. They often read less like allegories and more like mission logs. It is a subtle distinction, but a profound one. Were the Sumerians inventing gods to explain the universe they saw? Or were they documenting the arrival of beings so advanced that God was the only word that even came close to fitting? The clay tablet in our hand feels heavier now, as if it were the fulcrum upon which this entire immense mystery balances. The question of what the Anunnaki were gods born of faith or visitors from the sky still hangs in the dusty, silent air of the tablet house. We gently place the cylinder seal back on its shelf, its secret still locked within its carved surface, and our fingers find another tablet. This one seems to tell a different part of the story. It is less about cosmic arrivals and celestial journeys, and more about what happened after they settled in. As we begin to decipher the dense clusters of wedge-shaped symbols, a new picture emerges. If these beings were indeed a divine celestial board of directors, their meetings must have been an absolute nightmare. The story of the Anunnaki is not one of monolithic, unified purpose. On the contrary, it is a sprawling saga of factions, of bitter arguments, of betrayals, and of deep-seated family drama that would make any modern soap opera seem tame by comparison. And at the very heart of this cosmic turmoil are two central figures, two half-brothers whose eternal rivalry would ultimately shape the destiny of our entire planet. If you were hoping to find a serene, all-knowing, and harmonious pantheon, you have come to the wrong mythology. This is far more interesting. On one side, we have Enlil. From the descriptions in the texts, we can form a clear picture of him. Stern, powerful, a being of immense authority who possessed very little patience. In the official Sumerian pantheon, he is the god of the wind, the air, and the storms. His name is often translated as Lord of the Command. He is the ultimate authority on Earth, the chief operating officer of the entire terrestrial mission, tasked by their father, the distant and often absent sky god Anu, with managing the new colony. Enlil is a being obsessed with order, hierarchy, and efficiency. He is the kind of boss who would invent quarterly performance reviews and then schedule them for late on a Friday afternoon. The texts consistently portray him as irritable and short-tempered, particularly when it comes to the noisy, messy business of other living creatures. He values his peace and quiet above all else, and he does not suffer fools, or indeed anyone else, gladly. On the other side of this cosmic divide, we have his half-brother Enki. If Enlil is the stern commander, Enki is the brilliant, innovative, and often mischievous head of the science and engineering division. His name means Lord of the Earth, but his primary domain is the Absu, the vast freshwater ocean believed to exist deep beneath the ground. He is the god of water, yes, but he is also the god of knowledge, wisdom, magic, and creation. He is the supreme scientist, the master artist, the chief engineer. Where Enlil is rigid and unyielding, Enki is flexible and creative. Where Enlil sees problems that need to be eliminated, Enki sees fascinating puzzles that need to be solved. He is depicted as being profoundly clever, a master of technology and invention, but also as being far more approachable and, crucially, more sympathetic to the lesser beings in the cosmic hierarchy, especially, as we shall see, to humans. He is the kind of manager who not only knows all the loopholes in the rules his brother wrote, but probably designed them in the first place. This fundamental conflict between these two powerful beings is the engine that drives the vast majority of Sumerian mythology. We can see it playing out in countless stories etched into these clay tablets. Enlil demands more work from the lower-ranking gods. Enki devises a clever new tool to make the labor easier. Enlil becomes infuriated by the noise of a growing population. Enki schemes behind his back to protect them. It is a classic sibling rivalry, but one played out on a planetary scale. It is a celestial version of every tense family dinner you have ever witnessed, except in this case, the fate of the world hangs in the balance. One of the most fascinating elements of their ongoing power struggle involves a mysterious concept known as the Me, pronounced May. These are described as a set of divine decrees or sacred cosmic laws that are fundamental to the existence and functioning of civilization. They represent all the essential knowledge, skills, and arts, everything from the principles of kingship and lawmaking to the technical knowledge of crafts like woodworking, writing, and metallurgy. The truly curious part is that in some myths, the Me are not just abstract concepts. They are described as actual physical objects. Perhaps tablets or other items that could be held, worn, or most importantly, stolen. Sumerologists continue to debate the full meaning and scope of the me, whether they were tangible artifacts, abstract divine essences, or a complex legal and philosophical framework for their society. Whatever they were, their original guardian was Enki. In one famous and rather amusing story, the goddess Inanna, a granddaughter of Enlil, travels to visit Enki in his watery abode. She proceeds to challenge him to a drinking contest, gets him completely intoxicated on beer, and then coaxes him into giving her dozens of the precious me. She promptly loads them onto her boat of heaven and spirits them away to her own city of Uruk, effectively transferring a massive amount of cosmic power and prestige. It's a hilarious tale of divine carelessness, like a general leaving the nuclear launch codes on a barstool after one too many cosmic ales. Enki eventually awakens with a splitting headache and a universe-sized sense of regret, but it is too late. The story beautifully underscores his occasionally fallible, very ungodlike, and ultimately relatable nature. This rivalry was not just for sport. It had profound and lasting consequences. We find a tablet that tells the story of the lesser gods, the Aegii, who had been tasked with the backbreaking labor of digging out the Tigris and Euphrates riverbeds. After centuries of ceaseless toil, they finally reach a breaking point. In an act of open rebellion, they go on strike. They burn their tools, abandon their work, and surround Enlil's house, refusing to work any longer. Enlil, in his typical fashion, is incandescent with rage and wants to punish the rebels severely. But Enki, ever the problem solver, steps in with a different kind of solution. He presents a radical plan to the divine council. Let us not punish the workers, he suggests. Instead, let us create a new being, a substitute worker designed specifically to take over the hard labor. Let us fashion a Lulu, a primitive worker. And with that single pragmatic suggestion, the destiny of a certain bipedal ape, at that time happily minding its own business somewhere in Africa, was about to be changed forever. The creation of humanity, in these ancient tales, was not a grand, benevolent act of love. It was a practical, almost cynical solution to a labor dispute, brokered by Enki to appease his furious, overstressed brother. The fate of our entire species, born from an argument between divine management and a unionized workforce. The drama does not get more epic or more strangely familiar than that. The weight of Enki's audacious proposal to solve a labor crisis by engineering an entirely new species still hangs in the quiet air of the tablet library. It is a solution so bold, so cynically practical, that it sends a shiver of unease down the spine. We carefully place that tablet back on its shelf, and our eyes are drawn to a different kind of artifact. It is not a flat tablet, but a large, four-sided clay prism, standing upright like some strange, forgotten trophy. Its surface is covered not in a flowing narrative, but in neat, orderly columns of text. It looks like a ledger, an inventory, an ancient spreadsheet carved in stone. This is a version of the Sumerian king list, one of the most enigmatic, fascinating, and deeply frustrating documents ever unearthed from the Mesopotamian sands. We lean closer, tracing the meticulous lines of cuneiform with a fingertip. The document begins with a pronouncement that is at once simple and absolutely stunning. It says, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." Notice the wording. It doesn't say kingship was invented by humans, or that it evolved naturally from tribal chieftains. It states that it descended, as if it were a piece of technology, a gift, or perhaps a corporate mandate sent down from head office. And then the list begins. In the first city of Eridu, the document states, the first king was a ruler named Alulim. We scan across to the next column, the one that records the length of his reign. For a moment, our brain stumbles, struggling to process the number. It says he ruled for 28,800 years. We blink, assuming we have misread the ancient script. But we have not. we read the next line. The second king, Alulnir, is listed as having ruled for 36,000 years. And on it goes. The list details 8 kings who ruled from 5 different cities for a combined total of 241,200 years. A single political term lasting for nearly 29 millennia would make even the most entrenched modern dictators look like temporary interns. What could one possibly do for that long? You would exhaust every known hobby by the 3rd millennium, and likely spend the rest of your reign simply trying to remember where you left your chariot keys. It is a set of numbers so fantastically, so impossibly large, that it seems like a deliberate joke, a clear and unambiguous signal that we have now departed from the realm of history and entered the world of pure myth. And this, of course, is the mainstream historical interpretation. The Sumerian king list is a very real artifact. Several copies exist, with the Weld Blundell prism being one of the most complete. Historians and archaeologists widely agree that these early, antediluvian, meaning before the flood, reigns are not to be taken as literal history. They are mythological. The immense numbers were almost certainly symbolic, intended to convey an immeasurable sense of deep time, divine favor, and to bestow a profound legitimacy upon the entire institution of kingship. It may well have been a powerful political tool. Imagine you are a king in, say, 2000 BC, with a somewhat shaky claim to the throne. What better way to solidify your rule than to produce an official document showing an unbroken chain of command stretching back for 250,000 years, all of it ordained directly from heaven? Historians continue to debate the true purpose of the king list. Was it political propaganda, a genuine attempt at history based on flawed sources, or a seamless blend of mythological storytelling and scribal record-keeping? But as we stare at the precise, carefully inscribed numbers on the clay prism, another, more unsettling possibility whispers from the ancient script. What if it is not a metaphor? The ancient astronaut theory looks at a document like this and does not see symbolism. It sees data. It asks a simple, provocative question. What if these first 8 kings were not human? What if they were the Anunnaki themselves, ruling directly over their new domain? Or perhaps they were their direct, pure-blooded descendants, beings who possessed lifespans that made a human life seem as brief and insignificant as the flicker of a firefly. To a being who lives for 50,000 years, a reign of 28,800 years is not a mythological eternity. It is simply a long and distinguished career. In this interpretation, the list is not an exaggeration. It is a literal record. The problem is not with the data, but with our own human-centric assumptions about what is possible. Maybe the scribes were not trying to be poetic. Maybe they were just writing down exactly what they were told, scratching their heads in disbelief as they carved the unbelievable numbers as instructed. Are you quite sure, my lord? 43,200 years? Very well. Your reign, your rules. Then, as our finger traces down the column of names and numbers, we find the line that changes everything. After the 8th king, the text notes, bluntly and without ceremony, "Then the flood swept over." There is a clean, sharp break in the record. The slate is wiped clean. And then comes the next line. After the flood swept over, and the kingship descended from heaven a second time, the kingship was in Kish. A new city. A new beginning. We scan the names of the kings who are listed as having ruled after the great flood. Their reigns are different. They are still incredibly long by our modern standards. The first post-flood king is listed as ruling for 1,200 years. But it is a dramatic and unmistakable drop from the tens of thousands of years listed for the reigns before the flood. And as we read further down the list, the numbers continue to shrink from thousands to hundreds, and finally to numbers that are almost plausible. Eventually, we reach names that historians can actually cross-reference with other archaeological finds, like the legendary Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, who is listed with a much more modest, though still impressive reign of 126 years. This sudden and dramatic shift in scale is what makes the king list so utterly compelling. If it were all just myth and metaphor, why the change? Why not just keep the fantastical, symbolic numbers going? For the mainstream historian, it demonstrates the list gradually merging from its mythological origins into a more factual, historical record. But for the fringe theorist, it is a clear signal of a fundamental change in policy, or perhaps biology. Perhaps the long-lived, pure-blooded Anunnaki rulers were replaced by hybrid demigods beings with diluted bloodlines and, consequently, much shorter lifespans. The list, in this view, is not just a record of kings. It is a record of a genetic timeline, documenting the slow fading of an alien dynasty. We are left staring at this strange document, a genealogical chart of kings that seems to straddle the impossibly thin line between history and legend. It feels less like a myth and more like a corrupted data file, a historical database where the first few entries are so outlandish that they force you to question the integrity of everything that follows. Our minds are still reeling from the impossible chronology of the king list, that strange and formal accounting of millennia long, reigns that were brought to an abrupt end by a great world-altering flood. We gently set the clay prism aside and allow our gaze to return to the endless shelves of tablets. We feel a pull to go back, not just before the flood, but before the kings, before the very first city was ever built. We want to understand the true beginning of the story, not for the rulers, but for their subjects. Our fingers eventually find a large, flat tablet. Its cuneiform script tells the story known to modern scholars as the Atrahasis epic. For mainstream Assyriology, this text is a cornerstone document, a foundational source that provides one of the most complete Mesopotamian accounts of both the creation of humankind and the story of the Great Flood. But to read it here, in the imagined silence of this ancient library, feels less like an academic study and more like uncovering a secret and deeply strange history of our own origins. The story begins not with humanity, but with the gods, and it immediately confirms the situation we learned of earlier. They were in the middle of a serious crisis. It was, for all intents and purposes, the universe's worst labor dispute. The junior gods, the Igigi, had been tasked with all the manual labor required to make the earth habitable for their superiors, digging the great rivers, dredging the canals, building the Anunnaki settlements. For centuries, they had toiled under this burden, but their patience had finally, and spectacularly, run out. In an act of collective defiance, they burned their shovels, abandoned their posts, and marched on the house of their chief commander, Enlil. The grand project of building a world was grinding to a halt because the entire workforce had gone on strike. Enlil, true to his character, is enraged. He wants to make a brutal example of the ringleaders. The divine council is thrown into an uproar. But it is then that Enki, the master inventor, the peacemaker, the divine problem solver, steps forward. He has an idea. He speaks to the tense assembly, his words a calming balm on their frayed nerves. He suggests that they do not need to punish the Igigi. They simply need a replacement workforce. He proposes the creation of an entirely new being, Ilulu, a primitive worker who can be fashioned specifically to bear the workload of the gods. The council, desperate for a solution, agrees. The project is given the green light. But the creation of humanity, as it is described in this ancient text, is not a simple, magical act of divine will. It is presented as a very specific and very strange biological procedure. We read on, completely captivated, as Enki lays out the recipe. First, they require the correct base material. He calls for clay, but not just any handful of dirt from the riverbank. It must be clay taken from the edge of the Abzu, his own domain of primordial subterranean freshwater. This is the purest clay, a perfect mixture of the flesh of the earth and the life-giving waters. This is the terrestrial component, the biological hardware. But hardware, as any engineer knows, is useless without software. A guiding intelligence is needed. And for that, the recipe calls for something far more shocking. The new creature required more than just a physical form. It needed a spark, an animating principle, a measure of cognitive ability sufficient to understand and execute complex commands. For this, the recipe called for a divine ingredient. And it is here that the story veers into territory that is truly and profoundly startling. The council comes to a decision. A god must be sacrificed. His essence, his very being, will be used as a binding agent, infusing the inert clay with the spirit of ghost in the newly forged machine. The god they select for this honor is named Jeshtu-E, a deity described in the text as possessing intelligence, or perhaps more accurately, understanding. He was not an evil or rebellious god. He appears to have simply drawn the cosmic short straw. In a solemn and sacred ritual, his life force is taken. This divine essence, what the text refers to as his blood and spirit, is then mixed directly into the purified clay from the Abzu. Mainstream academics continue to debate the intended meaning here. Was the blood of the god meant to be taken literally, or was it a potent metaphor for divine intelligence, personality, and the essential, ineffable something that would elevate this new creature above the other beasts of the field? Either way, a final cocktail of ingredients is now prepared. Worldly clay, infused and animated with the spiritual and intellectual essence of a sacrificed god. But the process is not yet complete. This potent, living mixture is not simply shaped into a figurine and brought to life with a dramatic flash of lightning. The text describes a subsequent step that feels unnervingly clinical and methodical. The prepared clay is given to Ninti, the mother goddess, a specialist in the field of creation. She divides the mixture into 14 equal pieces. 7 are designated to gestate males and 7 to gestate females. These pieces are then implanted into the wombs of 14 birth goddesses, who act as the first surrogate mothers for this new species. The description reads less like a sacred myth and more like a dispatch from the universe's first advanced surrogacy clinic. There is a set gestation period. The birth goddesses wait, the Anunnaki council waits, and after the specified time has passed, Ninti announces the success of her work. The first human beings are born. You pull back from the imagined tablet, the profound weight of the story settling upon you like a physical cloak. This is no gentle pastoral tale of a benevolent father creating children in his own perfect image out of love. This is a story of bioengineering, cold and pragmatic. It is the story of a master class of beings fabricating a subservient species for a single, overriding purpose: to work, to take upon themselves the yoke, the toil, that the junior gods had thrown down in rebellion. That divine spark, the quality that supposedly makes humanity special and unique, is, in this telling, merely an engineered feature. It is the ghost of a sacrificed being, forever binding our species to the will of its creators. We were made to be slaves. We were designed to be intelligent enough to follow orders, but perhaps not so intelligent as to begin asking our own questions. At least that was the plan. You look down again at the cuneiform story of our own creation, and you cannot help but feel a profound and deeply unsettling chill. The shadow of the ziggurat you saw earlier now feels longer and much, much darker. The heavy truth of the creation story settles upon you like a shroud of dust. You need air. You need perspective. Quietly, you leave the house of tablets, the repository of these staggering secrets, and step back out into the cool Mesopotamian night. The city is utterly still now. The domestic smells of baking bread and penned livestock have faded, replaced by the clean, elemental scent of dry earth and vast, empty distance. Your gaze is drawn once more, as if by a magnetic force, to the immense dark shape that dominates the skyline, the ziggurat. Before, it was a symbol of faith, a monument to the power of the gods. But now, With the story of the Ijiji strike and Enki's chillingly practical solution still echoing in your mind, it looks like something else entirely. It no longer seems like a temple. It looks like a tool, a piece of immense, inscrutable infrastructure. You feel an irresistible urge to see it up close again, to understand it from this new, unsettling perspective. You begin to climb the massive central staircase. The mud brick steps are wide and steep, their surfaces worn into shallow, concave bowls by the passage of countless feet over innumerable centuries. There are no handrails, of course. Ancient safety regulations were, to put it mildly, a little lax. With each upward step, the sleeping city spreads out below you like a dark, patterned carpet. The narrow, labyrinthine streets you walked through earlier are now just thin black lines separating the blocky, geometric shapes of the houses. The world grows progressively quieter. The small, ambient sounds of the city fade away until the only things you can hear are the soft whisper of the wind against the sea, ancient bricks, and the sound of your own measured breathing. You are ascending both literally and figuratively, leaving the world of the newly created workers far below and climbing toward the exclusive domain of their masters. With every broad terrace you reach, you pause, looking at the sheer scale of the construction, the mind-boggling expenditure of labor it represents. Mainstream history and archaeology tell us a crucial and fascinating fact. Ziggurats were not tombs. Unlike the Great Pyramids of Egypt, which were built as elaborate and eternal houses for the remains of pharaohs on their journey into the afterlife, these Mesopotamian structures were solid. They were, in essence, man-made mountains of clay, crowned with a small building at the very top. This shrine, known as the Jigunu, was not for burials. It was intended as a dwelling place, a temporary residence for the city's patron god for those times when they chose to descend from the heavens and visit their people. It was a divine hotel, the penthouse suite in the grandest structure the Sumerians could conceive of and build, a tangible, physical meeting point between the earthly and the divine. But as you continue your climb, your modern mind, now armed with the alternative theory of the Anunnaki as physical visitors, begins to play with that definition. A dwelling place for a being who comes from the sky. The wind picks up, whistling through the ancient cracks in the brickwork, and it almost sounds as if it's asking a question. What if its primary function was far more literal? You reach the next level and make a conscious effort to see the structure not as a temple, but as a piece of technology. Observe its design, the tiered construction, the massive flat platforms, the central staircase reaching directly for the sky. Does it remind you of anything? To a fringe theorist, a ziggurat does not look like a symbolic mountain. It looks like a launch gantry. It bears a striking resemblance to the massive platforms at Cape Canaveral or Baikonur, structures designed specifically to support and service a vehicle that travels to the stars. Was the shrine at the top merely a sacred space for priests to leave offerings of food and drink for an invisible deity? Or was it a control room, a docking clamp, or a refueling station for the celestial boats and shining chariots so vividly described in the myths? Perhaps the entire structure was a massive power conductor, a colossal device designed to draw some form of energy from the earth or the atmosphere. Or maybe it was a communications array, a giant antenna for sending and receiving messages from their distant home world, a divine cell tower, but with far better reception and absolutely no data caps. While most archaeologists agree on the ziggurat's primary religious and ceremonial function, there is still some scholarly discussion regarding their secondary roles, particularly their precise use in astronomical observation and calendrical calculations. They were certainly aligned with celestial bodies with great precision, but was that merely for marking the seasons for agriculture? Or was it for marking specific arrival and departure windows for celestial traffic? Finally, you reach the summit. The original shrine is long gone, weathered away into nothingness by thousands of years of relentless sun and scouring wind. But you stand on the flat, windswept expanse where it once was. You are at the highest man-made point in the entire region. The sky above is a vast, overwhelming dome of brilliant, seemingly infinite stars. The Milky Way is a luminous, breathtaking slash across the profound darkness. Up here, at the nexus point between heaven and earth, the ambiguity is dizzying. You look down at the city, a sprawling, silent grid of sleeping, manufactured laborers. You look up at the star-filled sky, the supposed home of the beings who made them. And you are standing on the very structure that was designed to connect the two. Is this a monument of pure faith, a magnificent testament to the universal human need to reach for something greater than itself? Or is it a piece of derelict alien technology, its true purpose long forgotten and subsequently repurposed as an object of religion? The Sumerians called the great ziggurat of Babylon the Anunnaki, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. Are we talking about a symbolic foundation or a physical one? The wind blows cool and steady against your face, carrying with it the deep silence of the ages. The ziggurat offers no easy answers. It just stands here, a magnificent, infuriating puzzle of mud, brick, and myth, its secrets held as tightly and as silently as the stars above. The wind whipping across the top of the ziggurat seems to carry a new scent. It is the smell of ozone, of distant rain, of a great storm gathering just beyond the horizon of your imagination. A phantom chill runs through you, a sudden primal urge to descend, to seek shelter from a cataclysm that scoured this land millennia ago. You carefully make your way back down the great staircase, leaving the ambiguous monument behind, and find yourself once more in the quiet sanctuary of the tablet house. Drawn by some unseen instinct, you move toward a specific shelf and pick up a tablet that is famous the world over. This is Tablet She of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it contains a story so profound and powerful that its echoes can be found in nearly every culture on Earth. It is the story of the Great Flood. As you trace the dense cuneiform symbols, you are struck by a stunning historical fact. This version of the story, this Sumerian and later Babylonian account, predates the biblical story of Noah and his ark by at least 1,000 years. The tale of a world washed clean by a divine deluge is not unique, but its earliest known written form is right here, etched into this very clay. You delve into the narrative, and the reason given for the impending disaster is frankly bizarre. The flood was not sent because of humanity's wickedness, their sins, or their moral corruption. The problem, according to the texts, was that they were simply too loud. The human race, Enki's little worker project, had been immensely successful. They had multiplied and spread across the land, filling the earth, and all their activity, their building, their farming, their living, created a constant, inescapable clamor. This noise, the texts say, traveled all the way up to the heavens and severely disturbed the chief god Enlil. He couldn't get any sleep. After millennia of putting up with it, he had finally had enough. He was the ultimate grumpy landlord, and his tenants were having a party that had gone on for far too long. Enlil convenes the Anunnaki Council. He makes his case, arguing passionately that the only way to get some peace and quiet is to wipe the slate clean. He proposes a great flood to eliminate humanity, once and for all. This time, the council agrees with him. Perhaps they, too, were tired of the noise, or maybe they simply did not want to argue with their fearsome, short-tempered commander. They all swear a solemn oath to let the flood happen and, crucially, to keep the plan a secret from all mortals. Humanity is to be given no warning of its impending doom. But Enki, the conflicted creator, finds himself in an impossible position. He is bound by the council's sacred oath, but he cannot stand by and watch his own creation be utterly annihilated. So, in an act of sublime and cunning trickery, he finds a loophole. He travels to the city of Shuruppak, to the home of a righteous and devout man named Utnapishtim. He does not speak to Utnapishtim directly, as that would be a clear violation of his oath. Instead, he stands outside the man's house and pretends to speak to the wall of the reed hut, knowing full well that Utnapishtim is listening intently on the other side. It is the divine equivalent of an accidental butt dial, a carefully orchestrated piece of plausible deniability. Reed wall, he whispers urgently. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon your possessions and save your life. He then gives the wall a very specific set of instructions. The exact dimensions for the vessel, the need for a strong roof to withstand the deluge, and the critical importance of sealing. Every single scene with bitumen, that same sticky black asphalt you saw, holding the city walls together. He tells the wall to have its owner take aboard his family, his craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. Utnapishtim, of course, understands the coded message perfectly. He and his craftsmen build the great boat in secret, and just as the final layer of bitumen is applied, the storm begins. The description of the deluge in the text is terrifying. The sky darkens ominously, the dams of the heavens are opened, and the primordial waters of the abyss surge upwards from below. The storm is so violent that even the gods themselves are scared, retreating to the highest heaven, and, as the text poetically puts it, cowering like dogs. For 6 days and 7 nights, the world is pummeled by relentless wind and torrential rain until everything is submerged, and a vast, terrible silence finally falls over the face of the water. Geologists and archaeologists continue to debate whether the prevalence of flood myths in this region corresponds to a specific, catastrophic historical flood of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, or if it reflects a more general, ever-present cultural fear of seasonal inundation in a land defined and dominated by 2 powerful and unpredictable rivers. Whatever its ultimate origin, the story is powerful. Eventually, the great boat comes to rest on the peak of a mountain. Utnapishtim sends out a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. When the raven does not return, he knows that dry land has finally appeared. He opens the doors of his ark and makes a sacrifice of gratitude to the gods. The savory aroma of the roasting meat wafts upwards, and the gods, who had been without their human servants and their daily offerings for a week, gathered like flies around the smoke. But when Enlil arrives and sees the boat, he is livid. Someone has survived. His grand plan for a quiet life has been foiled. Enki is forced to confess his subterfuge, but he argues passionately and eloquently, persuading a reluctant Enlil to allow humanity to continue, albeit with some new population control measures introduced to keep the noise down from now on. You lean back, the clay tablet resting in your lap. This is not just a story of survival. It is yet another chapter in the ongoing Anunnaki family drama. Humanity is revealed to exist in a perpetual cosmic tug-of-war between a God who sees us as a noisy pest to be eliminated and a God who sees us as a flawed but essential part of his own creative legacy. Our continued existence, this story tells us, was not guaranteed by divine love or grace, but was secured by a clever lie, a sturdy, well-caulked boat, and a very well-timed barbecue. You place the flood tablet gently back on its dusty shelf. The epic tale of destruction and survival echoes in the silent room, leaving you with a profound sense of humanity as precarious place in the cosmos, a species saved from the brink of extinction by a bit of divine subterfuge. This realization leads you to a new urgent line of questioning. After the flood, after the world was reset, what did the survivors know? What precious knowledge was painstakingly preserved from that drowned world, and what was lost forever beneath the silt? Your attention shifts from the tablets of myth and legend to the others, the ones that look less like grand stories and more like raw, unadorned data. You begin to sift through the archives, finding tablets covered not in epic poetry, but in dense, compact lists of numbers and symbols. You see complex charts mapping the movements of stars and planets. You find records of commodity prices, extensive legal codes, and detailed medical texts describing diagnoses and prescriptions. This is the lost knowledge, the operating system of their civilization, all meticulously recorded in the intricate cuneiform script. Learning this wedge-based writing was an arduous and time-consuming task, a specialized skill reserved for a dedicated class of scribes who spent years in training. Imagine doing advanced trigonometry by patiently pressing a sharpened reed stylus into a tablet of wet clay. It certainly makes you appreciate your smartphone's calculator app. But the very complexity of the script hints at the complexity of the information it was designed to carry. Your eyes are drawn to the astronomical tablets. Here, the accomplishments of the Mesopotamian cultures truly shine. It is a well-established historical fact that the Babylonians, the cultural and scientific heirs to the Sumerian legacy, were exceptionally sophisticated astronomers. They utilized a sexagesimal or base 60 mathematical system, a profound legacy you still honor every single time you look at a clock with its 60 seconds and 60 minutes, or measure a circle in 360 degrees. These ancient stargazers created detailed star catalogs and, using their advanced mathematics, could track the movements of the planets with startling accuracy. They meticulously recorded the path of Venus. They noted the strange retrograde motion of Jupiter, and most impressively, they could accurately predict lunar and even solar eclipses. Historians and archaeoastronomers are still deciphering the full extent of Babylonian astronomical knowledge, debating whether their remarkably accurate predictions were based on complex mathematical models or were simply the result of centuries of meticulous, long-term empirical observation. But as you stare at a tablet that correctly predicts an eclipse that would occur hundreds of years in the future, the Anunnaki theory whispers a different explanation. Where did this incredible, almost precognitive, knowledge truly come from? Was it developed slowly and painstakingly through generations of human ingenuity and observation? Or was it a download? The myths you have already encountered suggest that civilization itself, the very concept of it, was a gift from the gods. This brings you back to the central family conflict between Enlil and Enki. You can easily imagine Enlil's perspective. He was a firm believer in information silos, a very need-to-know basis kind of commander. To him, humanity was the workforce. And the very last thing you want is for your workforce to get too smart. Knowledge creates ambition. It creates questions. It creates a desire for independence. To keep humanity subservient, you would keep them in the dark, teaching them only what they absolutely needed to know to perform their duties. Then there is Enki, the rebel scientist, the creator who seemed to possess a genuine soft spot for his flawed creation. The fringe theory posits that Enki was the great teacher, the one who secretly fed humanity the forbidden fruit of knowledge. Against the direct orders of his commander and half-brother, he may have gifted early humanity the foundational secrets of agriculture, medicine, law, and astronomy. He was the divine Prometheus, but instead of just giving us fire, he slipped us a graphing calculator and a copy of the Farmer's Almanac. This paints the dawn of human intellect not as a natural, gradual evolution, but as an act of cosmic industrial espionage. Every great leap forward in human understanding was a quiet act of rebellion, a secret passed from a sympathetic god to his favorite creatures. So you look at these tablets again, this trove of cuneiform data, with a new and unsettling filter. Are you looking at the birth of human science, or are you looking at a heavily redacted user manual? The medical texts list hundreds of plants and minerals and their specific therapeutic uses. Is this the work of ancient doctors experimenting through trial and error for centuries? Or is it a carefully curated selection from a much larger, more advanced pharmaceutical database? The star charts are incredibly precise. Are they the result of patient, naked-eye observation over generations? Or are they a simplified map of the local stellar neighborhood, with the more interesting destinations intentionally left out? The knowledge is real. Its sophistication is undeniable. But its origin remains the central mystery. The collection of tablets feels less like a complete record of human discovery and more like a carefully curated starter pack for civilization. It is enough information to build a functional society, to manage resources, to feed a population, and to keep the gold mines a topic for another time running efficiently. But it is perhaps just limited enough to keep that same civilization from asking the biggest questions of all, from developing the technology to leave the planet, from turning their gaze back to the heavens and saying, "We're coming to see you now. You are surrounded by a library of secrets, guarded not by locks and keys, but by the impenetrable veil of myth and the vast passage of time, leaving you to wonder what other knowledge remains hidden in these clay-hard drives, waiting for the right person, with the right key, to finally log in." You are surrounded by what feels like a library of guarded information. The astronomical charts and mathematical formulas hint at a knowledge that seems far beyond what should have been possible for a civilization at this stage of development. But humanity, it seems, was not the only subject of interest documented in these texts. You put down the tablet of star charts and pick up one filled not with numbers, but with images and epic poems. As your mind begins to decipher the scenes, you realize that the world of the Anunnaki was populated by more than just gods and their human workers. It was a world teeming with beings that seemed to have crawled directly out of a fever dream. It appears that once you possess the technology for advanced bioengineering, you do not simply stop after one successful project. You experiment. Your imagination drifts out of the tablet house and back to the grand, fortified gateways of the city. Standing guard there, carved from massive blocks of stone, you would have seen the colossal statues of the Lamassu. This is a well-known and iconic feature of Mesopotamian art. These magnificent hybrid beings were apotropaic spirits, powerful, benevolent guardians meant to ward off evil and protect the city's inhabitants. You can picture them now. The massive, muscular body of a bull or lion, symbolizing strength and power. The great, feathered wings of an eagle, representing swiftness and divinity. And the calm, intelligent, bearded face of a human king, signifying wisdom. They are a powerful and reassuring fusion of the most desirable attributes of different creatures, a potent presence at the threshold of civilization. To the average Sumerian, they were a great comfort, a clear sign that their city was protected by potent magic. But as you now know, in the unfolding story of the Anunnaki, magic might just be another word for technology. You look at the Lamassu with new eyes. Is it merely a powerful symbol, or is it a portrait? Is it a depiction of a real living creature, an engineered guard dog for an entire civilization? You delve back into the tablets, looking for more evidence of such creatures. You find them in the great Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. The story tells of the primordial mother goddess, Tanat, who, in her great war against the younger gods, gives birth to an entire army of monsters. The text lists them in terrifying detail: horrifying serpents, lion demons, scorpion men, fishmen, and other ferocious hybrid creatures. These are not the noble, protective Lamassu. These are biological weapons, a monstrous army created for a divine war. This is where the fringe theory takes root and grows into a strange and thorny tree. If Enki and the mother goddesses possessed the technological know-how to combine the divine essence of a god with the clay of the earth to create humanity, what was to stop them from mixing and matching other species? What if their creation of Homo sapiens was just the final, successful project after a long and messy period of research and development? You can almost picture a divine laboratory filled with strange apparatuses and glowing liquids, with Enki at the helm, looking a bit like a mad scientist. Okay, the Scorpion Man was a bit much. You can imagine another god saying, "Let's perhaps dial back the pincers on the next one." The long litany of monsters in the ancient myths suddenly starts to sound less like mythological fantasy and more like a list of failed prototypes. It sounds like a cosmic beta test that resulted in some very, very weird character models. Art historians and mythologists constantly debate the symbolic evolution of these fantastic creatures, trying to determine if they represent the subjugation of primal chaos by the forces of divine order, a fusion of desirable godly attributes, or something else entirely. But the alternative explanation is so much more direct and so much stranger. What if the Sumerians drew these things because, at some point in their distant ancestral past, their people had actually seen them? What if the collective unconscious of humanity was haunted by the ghosts of the gods' abandoned experiments? The trail of evidence, as thin and circumstantial as it may be, continues. You find mention of the Apkallu, a group of 7 sages who are said to have lived before the Great Flood. They were divine teachers, credited with giving humanity the very foundations of civilization, the same knowledge of law, agriculture, and building that you are just pondering. But in many ancient depictions, the Apkallu are not shown as being fully human. They are often portrayed as fishmen, or as human figures wearing what looks uncannily like a fish-skinned cloak, complete with a head and tail. Were these sages another of Enki's specialized creations? A hybrid designed to survive in the watery depths of his Abzu domain, who were sent out as humanity's first school teachers? The sheer variety of these beings is baffling. It is a menagerie of chimeras. It suggests that for the Anunnaki, life was not sacred and fixed. It was malleable. It was a raw material, like the clay they used for their bricks and their tablets. They could add wings here, a scorpion's tail there, a fish's head on a man's body. They were not just building a civilization. They were populating an entire ecosystem with their own custom-designed creatures. The world they ruled over must have been a very strange place indeed, one where the lines between animal, human, and God were not only blurry, but were routinely and deliberately crossed. You are left holding a tablet with the carving of a muscular man with the head of a lion, and you feel a deep, primordial sense of strangeness. Is this just a symbol of a king's ferocity? Or is it a memory of something that once walked the earth, another product of the Anunnaki's genetic workshop, now thankfully lost to the mists of time? You are left in the silent, dusty tablet house with the chilling image of a divine genetic workshop, a place where gods played with the very building blocks of life, creating not only humanity, but a host of strange chimerical beasts. A question, massive and final, begins to form in your mind. If they were so powerful, if they built these cities, engineered life, and ruled for millennia, where did they go? It is perhaps the greatest loose end in this entire cosmic story. You begin to search for an answer, sorting through the clay records, moving forward through time. As you progress through the centuries, you notice a subtle but profound shift in the narrative. In the earliest Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are active characters. They are physically present on Earth. They chair council meetings, they inspect canals, they get annoyed by noise, and they speak directly to their chosen human servants, like kings and high priests. But as you move forward into the eras of the Akkadian Empire, and later the Babylonians and Assyrians, the gods begin to change. This is a solid, mainstream historical fact. The old Sumerian gods were gradually absorbed into new pantheons through a process called syncretism. Enlil and Enki did not simply vanish from the records. They were merged with other deities, or simply had their names changed. The wise and clever Enki became Ea in the Akkadian and Babylonian myths. The ambitious and powerful goddess Inanna was fused with other Semitic deities to become the equally powerful and often fearsome Ishtar. Their stories continued, but their fundamental nature shifted. They became more remote, more symbolic, more like the gods we typically think of today, celestial beings to be worshipped from afar, not powerful, physical figures you might bump into while they were inspecting a local construction site. The mainstream historical explanation for this, fading away, is tied to the decline of the Sumerian civilization itself. Historians debate the precise reasons for this decline, citing a combination of devastating factors, from centuries of intensive irrigation that led to crippling soil salinization and agricultural collapse, to catastrophic climate change that altered the course of the great rivers, to relentless and exhausting warfare between the rival city-states. As Sumerian culture waned, new powers like the Akkadians and Babylonians rose to prominence, and they naturally adapted the old religion to fit their new worldview. The Anunnaki didn't fly away. They were simply retired, rebranded, and further mythologized by succeeding generations. It is a neat, logical explanation that fits the known historical and archaeological record. And yet, it feels incomplete. As you sit here, amidst the silent evidence of their supposed works, the impossible knowledge, the strange creatures, the bioengineered workforce, it feels too simple. The fringe theories, as always, offer other, more tantalizing possibilities. The first is the most straightforward. Their work was done, and they left. The Earth Project had reached a stable, self-sustaining phase. They had created their workforce, taught them just enough to be self-sufficient, established the institution of kingship to manage them in their absence, and perhaps had finished extracting whatever resource they originally came here for. Perhaps the resource was the gold that is so often mentioned in the ancient texts. Like a team of cosmic contractors who have finally completed a very long and difficult job, they packed up their advanced tools, left humanity with a detailed list of chores, and pointed their celestial boats back towards home. There was no grand farewell tour, no final tearful speech from the heavens, just a quiet, efficient withdrawal. It was mysterious, anticlimactic, and very much on brand. A second, more conspiratorial theory suggests they did not leave the planet at all, but merely the public eye. They initiated a strategic retreat into shadow. Perhaps after the Great Flood and humanity's subsequent rapid proliferation, direct, hands-on management simply became too messy and inefficient. So, they handed over the keys to the kingdom to a carefully selected line of human rulers, the demigods and heroes who fill the post-flood section of the Sumerian king list. Then, the Anunnaki themselves simply vanished from sight. But they did not go far. Some theories propose they retreated into vast, technologically advanced subterranean realms, turning the mythical, watery Abzu of Enki into a literal underground haven. Others suggest they established bases in the world as most remote and inaccessible mountain ranges, or at the bottom of the deepest oceans. From these hidden sanctuaries, they could continue to monitor their grand experiment without getting their hands dirty. The final possibility is perhaps the most unnerving of all. They did not go underground. They went up. They retreated into a stable orbit around the Earth, or perhaps into a dimension just outside the narrow band of our own perception. Using their incomprehensible technology to remain perfectly hidden, they simply switched from direct, on-site management to remote administration. It is the ultimate remote work setup. In this scenario, they never left at all. They are still here watching, observing, perhaps subtly guiding the course of human history. We are the ongoing experiment. The ziggurats are no longer active communication nodes. The strange hybrid creatures have died out. But the project itself, humanity, is still running. We are a self-sustaining farm, and the farmers are still checking in on their crop. You look up from the last imagined clay tablet, your mind swimming with these possibilities. Did they leave us behind, an abandoned project left to our own devices? Or are we still being guided by unseen hands, our progress and our conflicts merely data points in a long-term report for a distant, or perhaps not so distant, CEO? Their disappearance from the historical record is not a clean ending. It is a cliffhanger that has lasted for 4,000 years, leaving you with the strange, disquieting feeling that the story is not really over. The silence in the tablet house is now filled with the enormous, echoing question of the Anunnaki's disappearance. Did they leave, or are they just hiding? The thought propels your consciousness outward, beyond the red brick walls of this ancient Sumerian city, beyond the fertile land between the two rivers. If a technologically advanced civilization truly operated on Earth for thousands of years, their influence would not likely be confined to a single region. There would be echoes, a global footprint, a signature style left behind in the foundational myths of other ancient cultures. Your sleepy journey continues, drifting on the conceptual winds across vast deserts and deep oceans, searching for these echoes. You first drift west, over the harsh, ochre deserts of the Sinai, until you see the lush, green ribbon of the Nile. You have arrived in ancient Egypt, a civilization as grand and as enigmatic as Sumer, but with its own unique and powerful flavor. And yet, as you begin to sift through its complex mythology, you find familiar themes resonating like a distant bell. The Egyptians worshipped a vast pantheon of gods who, much like the Anunnaki, were embroiled in very human-like traumas, conflicts, and family squabbles. You meet the god Thoth, with the head of a sacred ibis, the divine scribe who, the stories say, brought the gifts of wisdom, writing, and magic to the Egyptian people. He feels remarkably similar to the Sumerian Enki, the god of knowledge and creation, the great, benevolent teacher of mankind. Could they be the same figure, wearing a different cultural mask? The concept of divine kingship is also a cornerstone of both societies. The pharaoh was not just a political ruler. He was a living god, the incarnation of Horus on earth, the sole intermediary between the heavens and the mortal world. This is much like the priest-kings of Sumer, whose authority was said to have descended directly from heaven. It is almost as if the same celestial corporations set up franchises in different regions, each with its own unique local branding, but operating under the same core business model. Your journey continues, taking you eastward now, over the mountains of Persia, and into the fertile plains of the Indus Valley, and further still, into the heart of India. Here, in the ancient Vedic texts, you find tales that resonate powerfully with the Sumerian myths. You read of the great flood hero, Manu, who is warned by the god Vishnu, in the form of a fish, to build a great boat to survive a world-drowning deluge. The parallels to the story of Utnapishtim and the subterfuge of the water god Enki are unmistakable and striking. You also read of the Vimanas, the flying palaces or chariots of the gods described in the great Hindu epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These are not always described as poetic metaphors. The texts sometimes describe them in incredible, almost technical detail, as multi-story flying machines that could travel through the sky at great speeds. It is a concept that sounds uncannily like the sky chariots or celestial boats of the Anunnaki. Of course, the mainstream historical explanation for these remarkable similarities is quite grounded and logical. We know for a fact that there were extensive trade and cultural links between the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Ideas, like goods, travel along trade routes. It is entirely plausible that these foundational myths, a great flood, a wise god of knowledge, divine kingship, were a popular cultural export, shared, adapted, and reinterpreted by each civilization over the course of many centuries. This leads to one of the great questions in the field. Comparative mythologists endlessly debate the diffusion versus independent invention theory. Did these core myths spread from a single, common source, like a potent virus of ideas? Or do they arise independently in different cultures because they tap into universal human archetypes, fears, and hopes? It is the nature versus nurture argument, but for mythology. But then, your journey takes you across the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean to a place that supposedly had no contact whatsoever with the ancient Near East, Mesoamerica. Here, among the Olmecs, the Maya, and the Aztecs, the echoes become stranger and more specific. You see carvings of the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkanawais, often bearded deity who, the legends say, came from the heavens to teach humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, and astronomy, before departing with a solemn promise to one day return. Another Enki, another Thoth. The similarities in the archetype are striking. But then you see the truly quirky tidbit, the detail that sends a shiver of strange recognition down your spine. You see a stone carving of a figure, perhaps a priest or a god, and in his hand he is holding a small, peculiar object. It looks, for all the world, like a handbag or a small bucket. And you realize, with a jolt, that you have seen it before. You saw it back in Mesopotamia, on the stone reliefs depicting the Apkallu sages, the fishmen teachers, and other Anunnaki gods. They, too, carried these identical handbags. What is this object that it appears in the sacred art of two powerful civilizations, separated by an impassable ocean and thousands of years of history? Mainstream archaeology has no firm, universally accepted answer. Perhaps it is a ceremonial water bucket, a symbol of priestly status used in purification rituals. Perhaps it is a basket for collecting sacred pollen. But to a fringe theorist, it is a smoking gun. It is a piece of standardized, advanced equipment. A power pack, a toolkit, the ultimate ancient accessory that apparently goes with everything from a Sumerian robe to a Mayan headdress. The mid-20th century was a time of immense technological change and profound social anxiety. The space race was on, igniting the public imagination. UFO sightings were a global cultural phenomenon, and the dawn of the atomic age made humanity feel both incredibly powerful and terrifyingly fragile. It was the perfect fertile ground for radical new ideas about our own origins. Authors like Erich von Däniken threw a match on this kindling with his 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, which posed the question directly: what if the gods of antiquity were actually extraterrestrial visitors? But it was another author who would focus this broad, sweeping question like a laser beam onto ancient Sumer. His name was Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin was the man who took the fragmented Sumerian myths, the creation of humanity, the feuding gods, the great flood, the impossibly long-lived kings, and assembled them into a single, grand, unified theory. It is a crucial fact to note that Sitchin was not a formally trained historian, archaeologist, or linguist in the academic sense. He was an Azerbaijani-born author and businessman with a deep passion for ancient history and a self-taught understanding of cuneiform. This is the primary reason his work is almost universally dismissed by mainstream scholars and experts in the field. But to his millions of devoted readers, he was a brilliant decoder, a man who saw a literal, historical story where academics saw only metaphor and myth. At the very heart of Sitchin's theory is his most famous and foundational claim, the existence of a 12th member of our solar system, counting the sun, the moon, and the 9 planets we know. He called this planet Nibiru, the home world of the Anunnaki. According to his unique translation of the ancient texts, Nibiru is on a vast, highly elliptical orbit that takes approximately 3,600 Earth years to complete a single circuit. Its periodic passage through the inner solar system was, in his view, the catalyst for its inhabitants to visit Earth. This 3,600-year cycle, which he called a Shar, became the key to understanding everything, from the timing of their arrivals to the impossibly long reigns of the antediluvian kings. With Nibiru established as their home base, Sitchin then provided a motive. Why did they come here? He claimed it was to mine gold, not for jewelry or currency, but for sheer survival. Nibiru's atmosphere, he argued, was failing, and the Anunnaki needed vast quantities of gold to grind into a microfine powder and suspend in their upper atmosphere, creating an artificial shield to trap heat and reflect harmful radiation. It is the most elaborate atmospheric geoengineering project imaginable, and humanity was, essentially, the contract labor brought in to do the digging. Sitchin's narrative ties it all together in one neat package. The Anunnaki arrived on Earth from Nibiru hundreds of thousands of years ago. Their junior members, tasked with the mining, eventually went on strike. Enki, the chief scientist, engineered Homo sapiens by upgrading a local hominid to take over the labor in the gold mines. They ruled over us for eons, establishing the first civilizations. Enlil, the commander, got fed up with our noise and tried to wipe us out with the flood. Enki, our creator, saved a few of us. And eventually, their mission largely complete, they left. It is the ultimate fan theory of human history, meticulously constructed and epic in scope. For decades, these ideas were mostly confined to books and niche communities. But then came the 21st century and the rise of cable television. Shows like Ancient Aliens took Sitchin's theories, polished them with dramatic reenactments and CGI, and broadcast them into millions of homes. You know the style: booming music, quick cuts, and a panel of enthusiastic experts who connect the dots between Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mayan calendars, and Sumerian gods, always ending with a tantalizing open-ended question: is it possible? A drinking game based on the number of times, they say, ancient astronaut theorists believe would lead to a very short and messy evening. You have now tumbled all the way to the bottom of the rabbit hole. The scattered, mysterious whispers from the ancient world have been amplified into a clear, confident, modern voice. It is a seductive voice because it offers what history and archaeology often cannot: certainty. It provides a simple, all-encompassing answer to the biggest questions of human existence. Who are we? Why are we here? The story is complete. It is dramatic, and to many, it makes a strange kind of sense. But as you lie here in the quiet dark, you have to wonder, is this the brilliant work of a lone genius who correctly decoded our true history? Or is it simply the greatest, most imaginative, and most successful work of historical fan fiction ever created? You are floating in the comfortable certainty of the modern Anunnaki theory. It is a story so complete and compelling that it seems to answer everything. It is a nice feeling, like finishing a complex puzzle and seeing the whole, coherent picture for the first time. But just as you get settled, a different voice enters the quiet space of your mind. It is a calm, methodical, and deeply skeptical voice. The warm, dim lights of the cozy, speculative theater fade, and you find yourself instead in a stark, brightly lit lecture hall. You are now sitting in on the other side of the conversation, the ongoing and often heated academic debate between the fringe theorists and mainstream scholars. On one side of the stage is the grand unified theory you just learned, a tale of visiting aliens, celestial gold mines, and divine genetic engineering. On the other side stands a panel of archaeologists, linguists, and historians, armed not with sweeping narratives, but with peer-reviewed papers, soil sample analyses, and very, very detailed dictionaries. The clash begins, as it must, with language. The foundation of Zecharia Sitchin, as entire narrative, rests upon his unique translation of ancient Sumerian and Akkadian texts. The scholars on the stage argue that this foundation is made of sand. This is the core mainstream criticism. Sitchin's translations are not just unconventional. They are unsubstantiated and are rejected by the global community of cuneiform experts. For instance, his poetic and famous translation of Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came is dismissed. The scholarly consensus holds that the name simply means something akin to princely offspring or those of royal blood, designating their high status within the divine hierarchy. It is the difference between translating the word superstar as an otherworldly being of shining gas versus a very famous person. The skeptical argument continues. The Sumerian word Shem, which Sitchin famously translated as sky chamber or rocket ship, has a much more mundane and established meaning to linguists: name, reputation, or fame. The Anunnaki didn't ride in Shems. They were concerned with making a Shem for themselves. It is a fundamental difference that changes the entire context from science fiction to a very human story about ambition and legacy. The theorists are accused of seeing spaceships, where the text is only talking about reputations. Next, the debate turns to the physical evidence. The scholars begin to patiently dismantle the key artifacts of the ancient astronaut theory. That quirky cylinder seal, VA 243, which supposedly shows 12 planets, including Nibiru. A scholar points out that the seal's own cuneiform inscription identifies it as belonging to Ada, the scribe, and the scene depicted is a standard one, a presentation to a deity. The celestial symbols in the sky are common ones, representing the sun, the moon, and prominent, visible stars, not a scientifically accurate map of our solar system. And the mysterious handbag carried by gods and sages in both Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica? The academics identify it as a bandudu, a ritual bucket used by priests in purification ceremonies, likely holding holy water. It was a sacred object, yes, but not a piece of advanced technology. The ongoing debate highlights a fundamental clash in how we approach the past. It is a conflict of epistemology, the rigorous scientific method which demands that extraordinary claims be backed by extraordinary, peer-reviewed, and falsifiable evidence versus a more esoteric approach that seeks grand patterns and hidden meanings across myths, continents, and millennia. The scholars see the theorists as engaging in a massive game of confirmation bias, cherry-picking data that fits their narrative while ignoring anything that contradicts it. It is the academic equivalent of someone trying to explain your own family photo album to you, but insisting your grandpa was an astronaut because he once wore a silver jacket. From the other side of the stage, the theorists fire back. They accuse the academics of being dogmatic, of having their own rigid orthodoxy that they refuse to challenge. They argue that mainstream science is too afraid to ask the big questions, too invested in the status quo to see the revolutionary truth hiding in plain sight. They claim that the scholars have become the new high priests, guarding their official version of history and branding any dissenters as heretics. It is less a debate and more a fundamental disagreement on the rules of the game, with one side shouting, "Show me the repeatable data," and the other shouting back, "Open your mind to the possibilities." You are caught in the crossfire of this intellectual battle. The comfortable certainty you felt just moments ago has evaporated, replaced by the messy, complex, and frustrating reality of historical inquiry. The story of the Anunnaki is not a solved case. It is a swirling, unresolved argument. On one side, you have a breathtaking story that seems to explain everything. On the other, you have a mountain of sober, methodical evidence that says the story, however compelling, is simply not true. You are left in the middle, adrift between myth and fact, wondering which is the more beautiful and which is the more true. You are caught in the dizzying crossfire of the great debate, with compelling theories on one side and a wall of skeptical facts on the other. The arguments feel circular, a stalemate that has lasted for decades. Your mind, seeking an escape from this intellectual deadlock, drifts away from the quiet tablet house and the stuffy lecture hall. It floats forward into the bright, noisy, glowing world of the 21st century. Here, in the realm of pop culture, the debate is over. The Anunnaki have won. They have been revived, and they are more famous now than they ever were in ancient Sumer. You find yourself scrolling through an endless digital stream of movies, games, and online forums. The Anunnaki, and the concepts surrounding them, are everywhere. You see their story reflected in big-budget blockbuster films about powerful, godlike aliens who were sent to Earth eons ago to protect and secretly guide humanity's development. Their schisms and internal conflicts having massive repercussions for their human subjects. You see echoes in television shows about ancient gateways that lead to worlds ruled by powerful extraterrestrials who once posed as the gods of ancient civilizations, including those from Mesopotamia. The names might be changed to avoid copyright issues, but the blueprint is unmistakable. The Anunnaki narrative is a perfect engine for modern storytelling. Then you drift into the world of video games. Here, The gods and heroes of Mesopotamia have been living for decades, often completely separate from the alien theories. It is a fun historical fact that the great hero Gilgamesh, for example, has appeared as a recurring character in the popular Final Fantasy series since the early 1990s, usually as a powerful, multi-armed warrior. But alongside these classic fantasy interpretations, a new genre has emerged. You see games where the central plot revolves around uncovering the secrets of a precursor race, an advanced civilization that vanished long ago, leaving behind powerful technology and clues that they were the gods who created humanity. The Anunnaki have become a ready-made, compelling backstory. But it is on the internet, in the chaotic wilderness of forums, blogs, and social media, that the Anunnaki have truly found their modern home. Here, you see the core theories mutate and evolve in fascinating and often bizarre ways. You encounter the quirky and now infamous conspiracy that the Anunnaki are, in fact, a race of reptilian shapeshifters who secretly control the world's governments. This idea, largely popularized by authors like David Icke, merged Sitchin's ancient astronaut narrative with other unrelated conspiracies to create a bizarre but incredibly durable modern myth. It is like a conspiracy theory potluck. Everyone brings their favorite dish, and by the end of the night, it has all been mixed into one strange, compelling stew. The Anunnaki have become a meme. You see images of Sumerian carvings with sarcastic captions. You see the recurring doomsday predictions that pop up every few years, proclaiming that the planet Nibiru is finally on its inbound journey, its arrival imminent. These predictions come with blurry telescope photos and complex astronomical charts, spread like wildfire, and then quietly fizzle out, only to be revived a few years later. The line between entertainment, satire, and sincere belief has become impossibly blurry. Media theorists continue to analyze how the internet and social media platforms have accelerated the spread of these narratives, making it difficult to distinguish between a true believer, someone trying to sell a book, and a kid just having fun creating a spooky meme. It is Poe's law in full effect on a global scale. The Anunnaki have completed their final transformation. They started as Mesopotamian gods. They were rebranded by the Babylonians and Assyrians. They were reimagined in the 20th century by Sitchin as alien miners. And now, in the digital age, they have become open-source mythology. They are icons of ancient mystery, a shorthand for any grand conspiracy, a piece of collaborative fiction written by millions of people online. They have gone from being etched in clay to being tagged on social media. They have achieved a new kind of immortality, not through their own divine nature, but through ours, through our unending fascination with deep mysteries and grand, sweeping stories. The question of their reality seems almost beside the point. In our collective digital consciousness, they are very, very real. Your mind gently pulls back from the bright, chaotic glow of the digital world. The memes fade, the hot takes dissolve, and the noise of modern culture recedes until it is gone completely. You find yourself back where our journey began, standing in the immense silence of the Mesopotamian night. The air is cool and smells of dust and time. On the horizon, the dark shape of the ziggurat still reaches for a sky blanketed with impossibly brilliant stars. The entire sprawling, complicated story hangs here in the quiet air around you, and you are left to sift through it all one last time. So, after this long journey, what is the uncovered truth? The first, most solid truth is this: the Sumerians were titans. This is the bedrock fact that no theory, however grand, can ever change. Long before Rome, before the pyramids of Giza took their final form, the people of this sun-baked land invented the world as we know it. They gave us writing, the wheel, the first law codes, the 60-second minute, the 60-minute hour, the epic poem, and the city itself. They were brilliant astronomers, skilled farmers, and master bureaucrats. Their accomplishments required no alien intervention to be breathtaking. To attribute all their genius to off-world assistance feels, in some ways, like a profound disservice to our own ancestors. They were brilliant, and they were us. The second truth is that the grand unified theory of alien miners from Nibiru is almost certainly a modern fiction. It is a masterful piece of storytelling, a compelling epic that weaves every strange myth and historical anomaly into a single, cohesive narrative. But with its foundations in disputed translations and its physical evidence dismissed by mainstream experts, it remains just that, a story, a fantastic what-if scenario. It is a testament to our own modern anxieties and hopes, our fear of environmental collapse, our dreams of cosmic contact, our deep-seated desire for a simple explanation for our own often confusing existence. We have built a sprawling sci-fi cathedral on what might simply be a 4,000-year-old typo. And yet, we are left with the third, and perhaps most important truth. A mystery remains. Sweeping the popular alien theory aside does not answer the fundamental questions that gave rise to it in the first place. It does not explain why the first Sumerian kings were listed with reigns lasting 28,800 years. It doesn't fully explain why their gods were so often described as physically descending from the heavens to dwell in temples built for them. It doesn't make the strange handbag symbol appearing half a world away any less peculiar. The gaps in our knowledge are real. And in those gaps, in those deep shadows of history, anything can feel possible. Perhaps the most compelling idea that remains is the concept of a message in the myth. This is the final, quirky possibility that lingers in the air. What if the stories are neither literal fact nor pure fiction? What if they are the distorted, funhouse mirror reflection of a real, profound event that early humanity experienced but lacked the vocabulary to accurately describe? Maybe it was not aliens from another planet, but an encounter with a more advanced, now lost human culture there. Technology so far beyond the comprehension of Neolithic people that it could only be described as magic their leaders only as gods. Ultimately, the enduring mystery forces us to confront a fundamental question about the nature of myth itself. Are these stories psychological maps of the human mind? Or are they distorted historical records of events we can no longer comprehend? We are pattern-seeking creatures, after all, hardwired to draw lines between the dots, even if those dots are separated by millennia of silence. So after all this, the final uncovered truth is that the truth remains covered. The mystery of the Anunnaki endures not because of the evidence, but because of the lack of it. And its true power lies in its delicious, eternal refusal to be solved. The ancient ziggurat before you seems to soften at the edges, its sharp, stepped silhouette blurring into the deep indigo of the pre-dawn sky. The questions that have been racing through your mind begin to slow down now, their urgency fading, replaced by a deep and quiet sense of wonder. The need to know, to define, to solve the puzzle, all of that can be let go. The journey itself was the purpose. And now it is drawing to a gentle close. The air around you feels still and peaceful. The great debates of gods and scholars alike dissolve into the vast silence of history. The weight of these ancient mysteries is not yours to carry any longer. You can leave them here, in the land between the rivers, where they have rested for thousands of years. Let the dust of ages settle once more upon the clay tablets, and let the secrets sleep. Your awareness drifts away from the sun-baked earth of Sumer, floating gently back into the familiar comfort of your own room. You can feel the soft weight of your blanket and hear the gentle, rhythmic hum of the fan that has been your companion on this long journey through time. The past recedes, becoming a soft and distant dream, and all that remains is the stillness of this moment. Here, in the quiet dark, there are no more questions to answer, no more clues to decipher. There is only the gentle pull of sleep and the promise of rest. The mystery can wait. It will still be there tomorrow.